Okay, y'all. Story time. So, none of these are my stories, just so you guys know. All of these are just made up that I made in my head. Okay, so one day there's this girl. Let's call her Lydia. So me and Lydia were hanging out, and she just moved to our school. So I was showing her around because that's what my teacher told me to do. My teacher was like, "Oh, can you show Lydia around?" And I'm like, "Sure, whatever." So I was showing her around. And so at the time, I have a boyfriend. Let's call him Jake. So I was showing her around, and Jake comes over to me and Lydia while I was showing her around. And I'm like, "Oh, hi, babe." And he's like, he ignores me and just says, "Oh, hi, Lydia." And I'm like, "You know her?" And he's like, "Yeah, I know her." And I'm like, "Oh, whatever." I kind of just brushed it off because, like, what if he knew her from, like, a game? Because he does have a lot of, like, football games. And he talks to other people. And I know I'm not petty, and he talks to other people. That's not just me. So he's talking to her for, like, an hour. And I'm like, "Jake, I need to go back to showing her around." And he's like, "Ugh, whatever." So he's, like, in his mood, and I'm like, "I'm sorry about him. He's in a mood." And she's like, "Yeah, he was my ex-boyfriend at my old school." And I'm like, "Okay, like, whatever. Ex-girlfriends, they can still talk. Like, you guys," I'm like, "Oh, you guys are still friends?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he always told me about how his ex was a psychopath. And I'm like, whatever. She's probably different. It's like, maybe he had 2 exes. And so we get to my house, and he is like, I'm like, "Oh, do you want to hang out?" Because we live together. We're like 18 at the time. So we live together, and he says, "Oh, I cannot hang out today. I'm hanging out with Lydia." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." And I'm like, maybe they just want to catch up. Like, they haven't seen each other probably in a while. And so the next day, me and Lydia choose to hang out because, like, we're kind of friends. I'm trying to become friends with her because she doesn't have any friends at our school. But I was hanging out with my other friends, too. Let's call them, let's see, Caroline and Courtney. So I was hanging out with Caroline and Courtney, and Lydia comes over. And she's like, "Hey, you guys," and whatever. I'm like, okay, maybe she just wants to become friends with my friends. Because, like, you're new, you don't have many friends, and you hang out with me. So I'm like, well, yeah, and if you're not friends with my friends, then it might be weird whenever we hang out. So she's like, "Hey, girlies," and my friends are just like, "Hey." And I introduce them. I'm like, "This is Lydia. She's new." They're like, "Okay." So we all just kind of hang out for a bit, and then they ask me if I want to go over, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm hanging out with Lydia tonight, but maybe tomorrow." And they're like, "Why don't we just come?" And I'm like, "Okay, whatever, yeah, Lydia." And then I asked Lydia, "Is that okay if they come?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah, that's perfectly fine." And I'm like, "Okay." So I invite them. And then after me and Lydia are done hanging out that night, she's like, "Why'd you invite them?" And I'm like, "I asked you if you were okay if I invited them, and you said yes." Okay, so the next day, fast forward, me and Jake and my 2 friends, Courtney and Caroline, were all hanging out. No Lydia, though, at the time. And then, like, 10 minutes later, Lydia finally gets to school because it's the morning, and she finally gets to school a bit late, like 10 minutes late. And we're like, "Oh, hey, Lydia." Like, I said, "Hey, girly," and Jake says, "Hey, Lydia," and blah, blah, blah. So she gets to school, and we all just start talking. And then she says, "Wouldn't it be funny if me and Jake dated?" And then all my friends, I'm like, maybe she didn't know. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm Jake's girlfriend." And she's like, "I know." And she kind of said it like that, and I'm like, okay, like, whatever. And we're like, "Oh, well, you can't date him. He's taken." And he's like, "I think it would be kind of funny." And I'm like, "You're dating me. It would not be funny." And I'm like, okay, maybe they're just joking around. Let's not get ahead of myself. So whatever. So me, Courtney, and Caroline all choose to hang out that night because we're like, well, we need a break from Lydia. And Lydia and Jake apparently hang out that night. We're like, okay, whatever. Slay, I guess. I don't care. So we're hanging out, and the girls are like, did you hear how Lydia was talking? And we're all like, yeah, she was kind of being her. And we're like, well, maybe she was just joking. I don't know. And Jake was probably just joking, too. And then the next day, Jake comes over to me, and he's like, we need to hang out tonight. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, he's like, okay, meet me at this restaurant at this time. And so we meet up at the restaurant, and then he's like, so I have something to tell you. And then before you can even get a word out, Lydia comes. And I'm like, oh, I thought this was a date, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, it was. And he's like, but me and Lydia are dating. And I'm like, Lydia said she was your ex-girlfriend, and you told me that your ex-girlfriend was a psychopath. And he's like, well, she changed. And I'm like, okay. And then he was like, because I just told him, okay. And he's like, you didn't give me a better reaction? And I'm like, what do you want to do? Make out? We broke up. That's all that happened. We're 18 years old. I'll find another boy. And he's very mad about that reaction. So he tells me that was all a joke. And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, since I was stupid, I said, okay, let's get back together. And he's like, yeah, okay. Lydia seemed really mad whenever he said okay. So the next day, we're all hanging out. Lydia's there, too. And Lydia says, why didn't you break up with her yesterday? And Jake says, because she's still my girlfriend. Remember, we were just doing that as a joke. And she seems really mad. And I'm like, I'm being me. And I'm like, yeah, Lydia, it was just a joke. And I said in that voice, and she's like, oh my gosh, you are so mean to me. You have been mean to me the whole time that we have hung out. Really, I don't think that we should be friends. And I just told her, okay. Like, whatever, bye. And she seemed really mad again by my reaction. So the next day, Jake's like, okay, whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I broke friendship with her, like, whatever. So the next day, me and Jake are hanging out because no more Lydia, so we have more time to hang out. And then I asked him, why were you hanging out with Lydia? And he was like, well, she kept on asking me to hang out, and I didn't want to be rude since she was new to the school. So she kept asking me to hang out, and I said, sure. I never even knew that she asked, or she told you that she was my ex, because she actually was not my ex, but whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's great. So he's like, yeah, I broke contact with her, and whatever. So my friends, the next day, I come to school, and Lydia's with them. And I'm like, guys, I broke friendship with Lydia. Lydia was standing right there. And I'm like, guys, I broke friendship with Lydia. Can you guys please do the same? Because I still want to be friends with you guys, just not Lydia. And they're like, well, you were rude to Lydia. And that's probably why she told us that she broke friendship with you. And I'm like, I was never mean to Lydia. And I asked them when. And they're like, you punched her yesterday. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I told her that I'm breaking friendship with her, and I left, and we did not hang out with her for the rest of the day. And Caroline says, who's we? And I said, me and my boyfriend, because he was there. And then whatever. So they're like, they believed me, obviously, because I'm their best friend. And they were like, Lydia, why would you lie? And she's like, she finally tells us, I lied because I wanted you guys all to myself. I wanted to have Jake as my boyfriend and you two as my best friends. But I didn't like, I'm just gonna say a fake name. I didn't like Lana at all. She was never my friend. I hated her. And that's not my real name, just so you guys know. So I'm just saying that because I don't want to use anyone's real name in this, because this is all just a made-up story. But whatever. So the next day, Lydia leaves the school. Like, she doesn't come back. And so a few days go by, and now we're kind of questioning, like, where's Lydia? She has been gone for, like, 16 days. Where is she? And a few days go by. Still no Lydia. It's been about 4 weeks by the time. It's been about, not 4 weeks, a month, because 4 weeks equals 1 month. It's been about a month since Lydia's been at school. And finally, she comes back after a month. So we're like, where have you been? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I said, I'm not friends with you guys anymore. And she had, like, dark under eyes, and we're like, yeah, you weren't, but we still wanted to know where you were, because you just disappeared for a month. And she's like, I'm not telling people that aren't my friends. And she was in that mood. So, during lunch, Jake comes and sits over with Lydia, because Lydia's sitting alone. And I'm like, I go over to the table, and I'm like, Jake, aren't you going to sit with us? And he's like, well, you're mean to Lydia. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, she told me earlier that you were mean to her whenever she first came back. You were like, what? Why are you back? And she told me that you were being very mean. So I think we should break up. And again, I say, okay. And then he's like, is that all you're going to say? And I'm like, yes. Because we broke up. We're, again, 18. That's all I'm going to say. Which I said the same thing last time, and I'm like, I have the same reaction. I'm sorry, bros, did you just watch that, though? I just got flung. Okay. But anyway. So whatever. He breaks up with me. 2 more days later, he figures out that it was all a lie. Lydia lied to him. And then he asked me, let's just get back together again. And I'm like, no, because you believed a girl that wasn't even your girlfriend over me. And he's like, but I really thought that she wasn't lying. All of this bullcrap. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, we're breaking up. I don't care. We haven't been together for, like, 2 days. I can deal without a man in my life. So, yeah. Moral of the story, Lydia's a liar. If you guys have a Lydia in your school, I am so sorry. That is just the name I chose to use. If you guys have any names, I am very bad at thinking about names. I'm good at thinking of the story, but not names. But if you have a good name, comment it down below. And if you have a good story, comment it down below too, because I will use that in my next story time. Because I really will use other people's stories. I will use my own story. And I will use your YouTube username in my story, that if you give me one in the comments down below. If you guys just want to give me names for the stories, that's perfectly fine too. I really hope you enjoyed this story time. Again, everything that I said was a lie. None of this actually happened. If it did, I would not be making story times right now. I promise you guys, I just do this for really much fun, because it's very fun to do on a daily basis. So, yeah. I just figured out I was going backwards, so. It literally minuses your stage whenever you go backwards, so that's kind of cool. Okay. But, again, one more time, this was not my story. This was not anybody's story. This was a fake story. I like making up stories for fun. And if you guys have a story, comment it down below. And if you guys have names, comment it down below. And, yeah. Thanks for watching.